deserves better to be passed by Congress than mine. Actually, Ellen Hodgson Brown said her solution was 1,000,000,000,000 times. 1,000,000,000,000 times, literally. That's what she wrote. More likely to be passed by Congress, as if Congress was not even going to notice that she took away interest from the banks. And of course, Congress isn't about to understand that her mere pretended solution is actually solution, especially when there's no proof of it or explanation even how it possibly accounts for stuff. She just basically says that, oh, if I put this money in circulation, it stays in circulation. It therefore funds all these things, not explaining, well, how is it then that it funds my house if I can't borrow money and money can't be a debt? Well, you can save it right out of that. Well, that's the problem, don't you see? The reason that she doesn't realize it is because she actually hasn't even put her toe in the pool yet of doing the math. I mean, the math is following all this stuff out and go, hey, wait a minute. If money can't be a debt, that means I can't issue a promissory obligation to pay for a house, even though I can pay for the house. Is that good for me? How is it? I might be 70 years old before I can save enough money to buy for the house by cash. And Ellen Hodgson Brown is smiling as if that's all to my benefit. What was wrong with the concept of paying for the house as I consume of it, especially since I can could have readily afford it, and the 50 years or whatever you forced me to save over caused me to be exploited by a rentier class who sought to drive up the cost of renting far above the cost of ownership because that was its means of exploitation and sustenance. You're not talking about justice when you just basically say, well, this will work. Well, how? But the problem is, I'm sorry, but that person who makes that assertion should be laughed off the planet, not just by me, but by everyone who heard it. Why isn't everyone finding that fault in it? Why are literally millions of people standing up now and saying, oh, money can't be a debt. Watch this video, money has debt. The video is preposterous. It's produced by people who haven't the slightest idea of the math or what they're talking about, or the fact that money can't be a debt. How can money have no obligation whatsoever? And isn't obligation a debt? How can money have no obligation whatsoever? They dream that it can. Oh, you could just spend it into circulation. Well, if you have no means of retracting it, then it's inflationary. Well, we do have a means of retracting it. It's called taxation. Well, then, you're not simply spending it into circulation then, are you? So that's how transparent their petty little lie to themselves is, that they're spending it into circulation and they've proven it. When somebody points out there's a deficiency in the limitations of that incredibly oversimplistic concept, the first thing they do is answer back immediately with a retort, oh, well, I can take care of that. We'll just tax it out of circulation, All right, so you may be able to do so in such a way which is not inflationary then, but how is it you distribute the burden of the taxation in accord with consumption of the property so that everyone is paying for what they consume in a just way? Well, they don't want to answer you anymore because they know that the only answer is to come back to the answer that you already provided and they've stolen from and changed into something else that isn't an answer. But what are they doing the rest of the afternoon and the next day? They're posting to the Ron Paul forum that money can't be a debt. And that's what we have. That's what our problem is that people are actually that pathetically stupid that they actually think that others could respect them for uttering preposterous, simplistic non-truths endlessly, ceaselessly against actual solution, as if they were right there with solution all the while. Life isn't like that. You know, we all have to meet our, you know, our day of judgment amongst each other, because one day or another we have to decide, well, shit, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I think the money is debt thing is, or at least, you know, not having money as debt is a ridiculous concept these days, anyway. Because if we have to go back to no debt, then we're back to the old system of, well, we have to have gold and silver in our pockets. If they believe that's the only value, then that's how we're going to be doing business. And I'm afraid you'll have the same system as they had 500-600 years ago, where the poor people don't have the gold and the rich people do. So, you know, we're no better off.
Well, there's other possible, you know, implementations of it. You could do better than that. But you see, the problem is, what you have basically is mere simpletons who are interested more in attention and effect than the genuine interest of solving the problem of humanity. Because an intelligent person has no tendency to so simplify the issue to think, well, because I read this parable of perfect economy, I don't even want to admit to the guy that who wrote it that I read it and that it influenced me, and I've just taken off on this tangent that money can't be a debt because that's my gut knee-jerk reaction to the parable, which I don't really understand. I got it wrong because I didn't notice that there's a planted flaw in it, which was part of the instrument of teaching, and so this person is just wrong, right down the whole path. But they insist nonetheless that they're right. You can explain exactly how they're wrong over and over to them, and I mean, I can actually name people who do this. There's a fellow in Europe who I can't believe that I run into him everywhere, and he's claiming money can't be a debt. And it's been explained to him over and over and over again. I mean, essays, a regular person would want to frame and put on the wall if they wrote it. Utterly, thoroughly disproving this concept. Can't possibly answer for all the cyclings of the life cycle that money has to account for, and proving what incredible disadvantages this money is, not to mention all of the entirely redundant bureaucracy that it requires to somehow measure the circulation and constantly be adjusting for it if they're maintaining an inflation and deflation circulation as they actually claim. Of course, they're not describing how to do this, but this is what you would have to do if you went about it this way. So you'd have to be constantly measuring the circulation. You'd have to constantly be measuring the remaining value of representative wealth, representable wealth, and you would constantly have as your devices of manipulating this circulation the options of spending it on things you may or may not need at all. But if you had to get it into circulation, of course, if your only option was to spend it on something that wasn't necessary, you're creating yet another thing. A problem with that is the two things exist, and the money is spent in this circulation to represent the other thing, not the thing it was actually spent into circulation on. So you have a disproportionate anomaly right there, which you're engendering, and it goes on and on and on. To get the money out of circulation. Likewise, your options may not be to cause people to spend it out of circulation, to pay for something, which is what they're consuming. And yet, if you reattach all these points and relationships to what they truly relate to, you restore their claim to mathematically perfected economy. By the time you account for every cent of circulation so that it is paid out of circulation justly, thus by who consumes of it, to the extent that they consume of it, you have mathematically perfected economy. That's your obligatory schedule of payment. It automatically maintains an inflation and deflation-free circulation, even without any regulation. You see? So all that this idea comes from is plagiarism, and the guy has a half-baked, at best, idea that he's come up with a solution to, which he can't even articulate, and the original author that he stole from can readily disprove, has disproven countless times, and yet still they go every day about, and about, uttering like a mockingbird. Money can't be a debt. And all that was their stupid, knee-jerk reaction to the fact that I raised that interest inherently and irreversibly multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal artificial indebtedness. But debt isn't the problem. It's the multiplication of debt which is the problem. Debt, especially if it's the only means of monetizing anything, and it's not really debt at all, but an obligation to pay for things as we consume of them, is an advantage, because it's the only way, in fact, that you can monetize anything rightly. No one has ever suggested an alternate proposition which works out. They haven't accounted for all of the issues, and that's why these stupid simpletons just simply regurgitate these preposterous, half-baked ideas if they're a wholly accountable solution. They're not. In fact, I'm being really polite. I mean, frankly, it's just pathetically ignorant and it reflects a pathetic lack of integrity that anyone is advocating these preposterous things could possibly solve our monetary issues. I mean, a thing that really pisses me off about it, I had a woman a couple years ago, and I'm stammering a little bit because I don't really like to, raise something like this because even as it is a truth that weighs upon me every day. But there was a fellow in one of the Ron Paul forums who suggested I be drug out into the street and shot. And of course, he had asserted all these false precepts and the basic dogma of Austrian economics, and just basically called me wrong rather than being able to prove, and everyone else was agreeing that indeed he was wrong, but he suggested I be drug out in the street and shot. And the thing about that is that I actually agree with the severity of the penalty. That is, indeed, if you speak about this, your words should be golden. But the thing is, I spent years reconfirming this, bouncing it off the most intellectual people on the planet, and, I got nothing but validation from extremely disciplined people. And it was, 10, 11 years before I even formally published the idea, even though I spoke about it on virtually a daily basis. But I never stood up until I was so certain of myself to a degree that, people would rarely impose upon themselves as a standard, because it's that important to be right. And that was over 30 years ago, So